I corrected the bank teller's tone after she said, "Anything else?" Apparently that was holding up the financial institution, which is dramatic, because the bank was already moving at the speed of a sleeping printer before I got there. I know people get very serious inside banks. They lower their voices, hold receipts with both hands, and act like the carpet knows their credit score. Fine. I respect the atmosphere. But if a place is trusted with people's money, it can also handle a customer noticing when a question sounds like a dismissal. Dan and I went on Thursday because I needed to deposit a check and ask one question about my debit card. One question. Dan said, "We can probably do this online." I said, "Some things require a person." He said, "That's what banks are trying to prevent." I said, "Exactly. That's why we're going." The lobby had 3 teller windows and 1 actual teller, which is apparently the official bank ratio, many little windows, 1 human being, and a rope line to make everyone feel like livestock with checking accounts. There were 2 people ahead of us. One man was filling out a deposit slip so slowly I could hear the pen losing hope. A woman near the brochures kept checking her purse, then her phone, then her purse again, which told me she had misplaced either her card or her entire sense of purpose. Dan leaned closer and said, "Please just deposit the check." I said, "Why are you starting with defeat?" He said, "Because I've been married before." To me, yes, that's the experience I'm referencing. When it was my turn, I stepped up to the teller window. The teller looked professional. Young, polite enough, hair pulled back, very bank approved. I'm not saying she was rude, I'm saying she had the warmth of a printer menu. She said, "How can I help you?" Good start. Neutral, usable, I said. "I need to deposit this check, and I have one question about my debit card." She said, "Sure." The sure was thin, but I let it go. People forget I let many things go. I'm basically a dam with earrings. She took the check, typed for a while, and asked for my ID. I slid it under the glass. She looked at the ID, then at me, then back at the ID. That pause did not need to be that long. I said, "Is there a problem?" She said, "No, just verifying."
Fine, verify.
I support verification. What I do not support is looking at someone's driver's license photo like it personally lowered your expectations. I said that photo was taken at the DMV. We all did what we could. The teller gave a small smile, barely, like a receipt curling at the edge. Dan shifted behind me, which is his way of silently begging the universe for a trapdoor. The teller processed the deposit and printed a receipt. Then she slid it toward me. Face down, I flipped it over. Dan whispered, "It's a receipt." I said, "Exactly. It should not arrive like a secret." I checked the deposit amount because receipts are not decorative. They are the paper version of trust me, and I like to verify before society moves on without me. Then I asked about my debit card. I explained that it had been acting inconsistent at one store. Not declined, not broken, just moody. Sometimes it tapped. Sometimes it wanted to be inserted. Sometimes it wanted to be wiped on my cardigan like a fainting Victorian child. The teller typed, "Tap, tap, tap." Then she said, "It looks active." I said, "I know it looks active. I'm asking why it behaves selectively." She said, "Could be the merchant terminal. Could be. Banks love could be. It sounds helpful while quietly placing the problem in someone else's building." I said, "So should I request a replacement if it happens again?" She said, "You can." Then silence. I waited for the rest of the answer. There was no rest of the answer. I said, "Is that a recommendation or just permission?" Dan made a sound behind me, like a man stepping emotionally into traffic. The teller looked at me and said, "If it keeps happening, you can replace it." Better. Not warm, but at least the information had arrived wearing shoes. I said, "Thank you." She nodded, printed something else, and then came the moment. She said, "Anything else?" But she said it while looking past me. Not at me, past me toward the next person in line. It was not a question. It was an exit sign with lip gloss. I stood there. Dan whispered, "No." He said that before I said anything, which proves he recognized the issue and simply lacked the courage to face it. I said to the teller, "Could you say that again?" She looked back at me. "Anything else?" I said that was the same phrase, but it still had departure in it. The teller blinked. The man behind us stopped abusing his deposit slip. I said, I'm asking whether you meant it as a real question or as a soft dismissal, Dan said. Karen. I turned slightly. Dan, this is a bank. Precision matters, the teller said. I was just asking if you needed anything else. I said the words did that. The tone did something different. There was a silence in the lobby. Bank silence is different. It is people pretending not to listen while absolutely listening with their mortgages. The teller said, slower this time, do you need anything else? Now she was emphasizing each word, which created a new issue. I said, see, now it sounds like I'm being tested. She took a breath. Not a giant breath. A service breath. The kind that says, I still work here, so I will not say what I want. I said, I can hear that breath. Dan whispered, please stop hearing things. A woman in line looked down at a brochure with the intensity of someone trying to disappear into a home equity loan. I said, I'm not trying to be difficult. Dan coughed. I looked back at him. He said, sorry, something in my throat. Nothing was in his throat. His throat had chosen a side. The teller said, ma'am, I'm just trying to help the next customer. And there it was. The next customer. Exactly. I was still the current customer. You cannot emotionally evict someone from the window while their receipt is still warm. Tell me in the comments if someone says anything else. But their eyes have already left the conversation. Is that still a question? The teller said, would you like to speak with a manager? Now, I did not ask for a manager. I want that understood. But if the bank itself offers escalation, I am not going to insult the architecture of accountability. I said, if that would help clarify the difference between a question and a dismissal. Dan turned around and stared at a brochure about refinancing like it might adopt him. A manager came over. Gray suit. Calm tie. The kind of man who says, let's take a look, even if the ceiling falls in. He said, what seems to be the concern? The teller said, she didn't like how I asked if she needed anything else. That was narrow. I said, I didn't say I didn't like it. I said it sounded like please leave dressed up as a question. The manager paused. That pause had paperwork in it. He said, I'm sure she was just trying to keep the line moving. I respect movement, I said. I do not respect being conversationally pushed, Dan muttered. We are absolutely being pushed now. I ignored him because marriage is not always a reliable witness. The manager said, do you still need assistance with your account? I said, now I need assistance with the customer experience. The teller looked at her keyboard like it had betrayed her. The manager said, we want every customer to feel heard. Great, I said. Then I want anything else to sound like I'm actually allowed to answer. He nodded. Professional nod. Empty basket. He said, of course. I said, could we try it again? Dan said, no, we cannot. I said, Dan, please do not interrupt a service recovery moment. The manager looked at the teller. The teller looked at me. I smiled because I was trying to encourage growth. It may not have looked like growth from the outside. The teller said, is there anything else I can help you with today? Better sentence? Better eye contact? But her jaw was tight. I said the wording improved. Dan grabbed the chain bank pen like he needed an anchor. I continued. The jaw tension is still communicating resistance. The teller closed her eyes for half a second. I saw it. The manager said, ma'am, I think we've addressed the concern. I said that sentence also feels like a door closing. The man behind us made a tiny sound. It might have been a laugh. It might have been a financial cough. Either way, it entered the room. The teller said, have a good day. Interesting. She avoided anything else entirely. I said that is a different exit strategy. Dan stepped forward and put one hand lightly on my elbow. We are done. I still have my receipt. You have had your receipt for 8 minutes. Time does not reduce relevance. The manager said, thank you for coming in. That one was polished, too polished, like customer service furniture. But I let it go because contrary to local belief, I do know when to stop. We walked out, past the rope line, past the brochures, past a bowl of lollipops nobody should trust because banks should not be handling candy. Outside, Dan stopped on the sidewalk. He said, you made a bank teller rehearse anything else. I said, I corrected the tone. You corrected her jaw. I observed her jaw. You reviewed her jaw. I reviewed the customer experience. He stared at me. Then he said, you know banks have cameras, right? I said, good. Then there is footage of me asking for conversational accuracy. He walked to the car. On the drive home, I checked the receipt again. Deposit completed, debit card active. Fine. But the receipt being correct does not erase the exit energy. People love acting like if the transaction worked, the interaction no longer matters. That is how you end up living inside one long automated phone menu. Later, I posted in the neighborhood chat, question, if a bank teller says anything else while looking at the next customer, is that a question or a dismissal? Brian replied, please tell me Dan was not present. Rebecca wrote, what did Dan do? I wrote, Dan tried to leave before the question had been emotionally resolved. Marcy sent a photo of her dog wearing a tiny banker vest. I have stopped asking about the dog. At this point, he has a stronger professional wardrobe than half the neighborhood. Brian wrote, Karen, sometimes people are just doing their jobs? I replied, jobs include tone. Rebecca wrote, did you hold up the line? I wrote, the line was already being held by underdeveloped closure. Exactly. The next morning, I almost called the bank. I did not. I wrote a note instead, the decline of sincere questions in transactional spaces. Will I send it? Probably not, but it felt important to name the pattern. Subscribe and turn on notifications, because next time I will explain why I told the dry cleaner my blouse came back emotionally shorter. As for the bank, I stand by what I did. I did not ask for money I did not have. I did not reveal private account information. I did not climb over the counter, although the pen chain was shorter than necessary and deserves its own conversation. I corrected the teller's tone after she said anything else, because it was not anything else. It was please leave, but with bank lighting. Dan can sigh. The teller can tighten her jaw. The man with the deposit slip can press his pen through the paper if that helps him process what happened. But I know what I heard. A question with the door already closing. If everyone else wants to be gently removed from conversations while pretending that is customer care, that is their choice. I chose precision. My side of the story, obviously,